Most founder-led companies stall because the founder becomes the operational bottleneck and the business lacks scalable systems for growth and alignment. On this week's The Next Interview with host Doland White, you'll hear Rich Smith explain exactly why founder-led companies hit growth plateaus and how leaders build alignment, trust, and scalable systems that actually drive lasting growth.
Most leaders are working harder than they need to, and they're getting less done than they should. And this is because decisions, accountability, execution still all have to run through them. That's not sustainable, and it's certainly not necessary. In Lead with Confidence, I break down how to create a team that moves without waiting for you. If that matters, grab your copy. The link's in the show notes. Now let's get to the podcast episode. Welcome to the Next Interview Show podcast. And as the host, the announcer, Liam mentioned when we came through that front door, I'm Doland White. I am the host of the Next Interview. And every episode starts with a tradition, and I'm blessed. I have the opportunity to have conversations with amazing leaders. And today, again, is by far no exception. Today, I have Rich Smith on with me today. And we're going to talk about a lot of different kinds of stuff. Rich has a really rich, I didn't mean that as an analogy. You have a rich background and a really, really interesting career behind you. But before we get started, I always start with gratitude. And I just wanted to tell you, I know there's 1,000 other places you can be. It's 11 a.m. where you are. You could be having an early lunch with somebody else. And you're going to hang out with me for about 40 minutes. So thanks for taking time to be here with me.
Well, thanks so much for having me on. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Cool. It's good to have you. So I have a short bio. This is the only time I read. So as I look away on the screen, Rich Smith, that's you, is a former marketing executive, P&L leader, which, by the way, that's a profit and loss for you people in business. Money is oxygen. So P&L leader, a founder who has led companies through rapid growth, operational breakdowns, and complex turnarounds, including bankruptcy recovery, which is interesting. I want to get into that a little bit. That's a tough turnaround for a lot of companies. Today, he works with founder-led businesses, and having spent time with founder-led businesses, there's a nuance to that. So I'm really interested in your insights. And to break through growth plateaus by installing practical systems that drive clarity, alignment, accountability, and sustained performance. And hopefully I didn't say anything about you that you didn't know about yourself.
No, I think I knew all those things. So
good. So let's just start, since it's the first time people are meeting you on the podcast. Let's just start a little bit kind of with your journey, kind of your career path. And there's a million moving parts to that little tiny 3-sentence bio that I just read. So kind of your path through all of that, and then what you're doing today, and then we'll get into a chat.
Yeah. Well, great. So I'll start at the end and then maybe jump back to the beginning and work through there. So
Awesome.
Over the last 25 years, I've been the chief marketing officer of 7 different companies. Everything from Fortune 500 financial services firms to 125 person data companies that I helped get to an exit. So I've covered a lot of different industries and a lot of different sizes of companies, both as their in-house CMO, but also as a management consultant. Jumping back to the beginning, how I got into all this, I could tell you I had some kind of grand plan for my career, but I did not.
What?
I would be lying. Yeah. No, I started out, and so I come from a family of engineers. In fact, my 2 oldest children are both engineers. My dad was an engineer. One of my sisters is an engineer.
Wow.
Cousins, in-laws. So big family of engineers. And I thought, all right, well, I'm good in math and science coming out of high school. I'll be a chemical engineer. So I started studying chemical engineering, and I got a couple years into it, and I spent a summer working at an engineering firm. And it was great, because sometimes it's more important to know what you don't want to do than, or just as important, I should say, to know what you don't want to do, to know what you do want to do. So having that experience taught me that that's not what I wanted to do. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do after that, because I had always thought, okay, I want to be an engineer. And now all of a sudden, I don't want to be an engineer anymore. So I transferred my major to economics, just because, again, I was always interested in math, science, economics, fascinated by how people make decisions and why people make decisions. And that will come into play later on in my career as well. But, really had no idea what to do with it. I spent a week when I was a junior in college. I went to Penn State. They have these 1-week internships that you can do during spring break. So while my fraternity brothers were in Venezuela, like on the beach, I was in Newark, Delaware, not to be confused with Newark, New Jersey, Newark, Delaware, at a very small credit card company called MBNA America, which happened to have the Penn State sponsored card.
Okay.
So I spent the week there. I apparently made an impression on some of the senior management. They offered me a summer job in the marketing department. Wow. So I came back as an intern in the marketing department, and that's kind of how I got my start in marketing. And I've been in it ever since. And I went back there after I graduated and worked there for several more years, which is, great place to be in the card industry in the 90s. It was really leading edge for a lot of marketing techniques. The data and analytics and the way that we turned it into a science was really groundbreaking. And that didn't exist anywhere else. It does today, but it didn't then. And the credit card industry, I think, was really one of the pioneers in that whole realm.
Sure.
So, I went on to move into, different, I've been in cards, I've been in insurance, I've been in banks, I've been in healthcare companies. And, what I do today is, sorry, I'm turning this into a little bit of a monologue.
That's all right.
Word in here soon.
I'm taking notes as you're going. So,
but what I do today is, I founded what I call a growth studio. And really what I mean by that is I like working with founder-led companies that really need to retool or tool to begin with their whole go-to-market strategy and approach. I have found that there are ways that, you can be very systematic with putting growth plans in place and executing them. And, one of the things that drives me is, I do some angel investing. I've worked with a lot of founder-led companies over the years. And, these are the organizations that are really driving our economy forward. They are the one. That's where the innovation comes from. Big companies do very little anymore. You look at big pharma; they don't really. They have R&D. They spend a lot of money on R&D, and sometimes they develop their own molecules. But a lot of big pharma, a lot of the new drugs, new medical devices, they're all coming from startups that have an idea and develop it and get it to the point where a big company comes in and buys it. So the large companies are not really good at taking that kind of risk.
Yeah.
What you find with a lot of these smaller founder-led companies or, mid-size, even large ones, is a lot of times they fail. The failure rate is very, very high. I mean, it's north of 60%.
Yeah.
And in some areas, even higher than that, like restaurants, et cetera.
Yeah. Very true.
And it's not, they don't fail because most of them don't fail because they don't have a good product or good service or good people. Mm-hmm. They fail because they've never really figured out a distribution strategy that gives them the cash flow that they need to self-fund and grow.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, a crime for all of us, because as a consumer, I want those new medical devices coming to market. I want the new products and services, those innovative things. I want them happening. They create jobs. They help our economy. They help the community. When a founder wins, it's not just them that wins, right? Yeah. Their family wins, their employees win, their investors win. It ripples out through their whole community. So I really feel like, that's actually, hopefully it's coming through a little bit. I'm passionate about it because I really feel like there's this massive opportunity out there. And a lot of times it's missed, again, not because they're not good products or services or good people running them. The opportunity is missed because they haven't really figured out how to get traction in the marketplace.
Yeah, I love that. I think we'll go back and unpack a couple things out of that too. Remember, we had that list of questions. I just turned it off. Um, the No, it's really interesting to me, Rich, because I agree with you. I think there's two different stances in business. The innovation happens in the market that you're talking about. Innovation has to happen there because they're looking at what do we create that's unique and different, or how do we make something better? How do we bring that to market? When you get into, I've worked in the body of a couple of very large organizations, and for them, it's less about innovation. It's about how do we acquire the innovation and then sustain it? What do we do? What does it add to our portfolio? And how do we get past that? And I know I'm singing back to the choir on that. A couple things that you talked about that I want to kind of go back to. The very first thing is, I think there can be a misnomer around what a CMO is. The secret is I was blessed to be CEO of a marketing company for several years. So we won't get into the weeds on stuff on marketing, but I'm really curious. How do you describe what a CMO? First, two questions: what is a CMO, and what the hell does a CMO do?
Yeah, that's a great question and somewhat difficult one to answer. But I would
Oh
say
yeah,
that
yeah,
first, the first and foremost is the CMO's job is to really be the brand ambassador of the organization. And there are a lot of roles that come into play there. One of the main functions that I think is really important for CMOs to be good at is looking at not where the company is, but where is the market going. Wayne Gretzky has a famous saying is like, I don't follow the puck. I go to where the puck is going to be,
yeah,
right? I'm
yeah,
messing his boat up, but it's something like that. And
yeah.
that's really part of the CMO's job, is to look outside of the organization and
Love
see
that.
what's going on and bring it back inside the organization and translate it. I think another really important role, and it's something that I talk about, I actually give speeches about, written about, is
Mhm.
I think a lot of people in marketing don't get to that CMO level because they haven't learned how to translate marketing speak into CEO speak. Right? Marketers want to talk about likes and followers and page
Right.
views and all of those things, and they're important, right? Brand
Sure.
awareness, all of those things are important. And we as marketers, and being a CEO of a marketing company, I'm sure you get it. You understand why those things are important.
Sure.
But when you talk like that to the CEO, what the CEO hears is, I can't tell whether we're making any money or not.
Right.
So you have to translate what you're doing into business outcomes and explain the business outcome side of what you're doing. Because why do likes matter? Why do followers matter? What impact has that had on our sales and revenue and ROI and
Yeah.
acquisition cost, right? Net revenue retention. Like, you have to start talking the language of a CEO or a CFO, and some of the most successful CMOs that I know are capable of doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that, and I think that's a missed point. So leaders, as you listen to this, there's a little rewind button on your phone that's got like a 30-second thing. Go back and listen to that again, because I think one of the things that a lot of, I think it happens, Rich, in all layers inside of an organization is there's an old saying. I'm originally from Alabama, so I tend to use a lot of redneck sayings. Um, but when you're inside of the jar, you can't read the label. When you're inside of that role, inside of the body of your company, it's hard to kind of step out of that and think about what is it that matters to that person that I'm talking to. What's important to that CEO? And I think that's a big jump. When you, as the chief marketing officer, one of the things and this is what you do with founders today, but inside of your career path, you said go to market strategy. And those three words, I think, are really, there's a lot. We could spend an hour just talking about go-to-market strategy or longer, um, but we won't. And go-to-market strategy, when you, from a marketing perspective, I think in a lot of companies, there's head knocking that occurs. For those watching on YouTube, you can see me do that. For those listening, I'm pounding my knuckles together. But when you there's those that sell, those that market, there's those in finance, and there's a bunch of silos inside of the body of the organization. And I think sometimes marketing is relegated to post strategy, and it sits in its own silo and it's viewed as a cost. So I'm kind of curious about, and there's probably some marketer out there going, "Amen, brother." Um, how do you? There's two sides to that. How do you help the non-marketing members understand what it is that marketing really does from a go-to-market strategy? Because I love your comment around about CMOs get out in front of it. They know where the market is going. They know where the puck is going to be. And then how do you, as the CMO, help those people kind of align into the value that you bring?
Yeah, great questions, and I'm sure the marketers out there are doing backflips to hear you say some of those things. I'll start by saying this. I think illustrates your point. Oftentimes, when I talk to a CEO or founder for the first time,
Mm-hmm.
they'll want to ask me questions like, "Should we be doing more on social media? Should we be spending more on paid search? Should we do more SEO? Should we go to more trade shows?
Yeah.
Do we need to invest more in our website?" And, my smart answer back to them is maybe.
Yeah.
Tell me what the strategy is, and I'll tell you what tactics to use.
Right.
And that's where I think a lot of organizations miss, big and small, is they want to jump straight to tactics. It's a very human desire to do things.
Yeah.
And the hard work on figuring out strategy is foundational to making those tactics work. So I think that's a big piece. And if you are a marketing leader and you're in an organization and you're not involved with the strategy in that organization, then you either need to push for change within your organization, or you need to go find a new one, because you're not likely to be successful there.
Wow.
So it's just a really critical piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. I love that, because that's so very true. I think one of the misses, and it's easy for CEOs to miss that when we, having been a non-marketing CEO previously as well, it's easy to miss that step in. Hey, let me bring the marketing team in to help me talk about brand or messaging or the pieces or the platforms. I tend to refer to it as platforms now with all the different stuff, probably because I'm old. But so I'm really kind of curious then, from a marketer's perspective, and then we'll leave marketing. We'll get on to some other stuff. You said something I think that's really interesting. There's a place in time and career where you got to call the ball, and we'll stay with sports because I see all the balls behind your shoulders there in your office. But when you got to call the ball, and I do think that's a point of discomfort for a marketer, to be in an organization where they receive strategy and they've got to go execute against it, and there's not a chance. There's not a pony's chance they're going to go get it done, right? Matter of fact, there's an old joke about a kid that goes in a room and the room's full of horse manure, and he's got a shovel and he's digging, and he's just laughing and singing. And his dad comes in and says, "Why are you happy? I filled your room with horse manure." He says, "Because I know there's a pony in here somewhere." So how does that marketing person kind of cross that into that conversation so they know what kind of ball to call? Because I agree with you. If you're ultimately not going to be involved in strategy, you can't. It's physically impossible to succeed. You can't get there from here.
Yeah, yeah, and we were talking earlier about the roles of a CMO
Yeah,
and how important it is to be looking outside the organization and bringing that knowledge back into the company and really
yeah.
owning the customer experience, right? And if you're just handed a strategy, that didn't occur, right?
Hmm.
If you as the marketing
Well
leader
said.
are not
Yeah,
involved in creating the strategy, then that strategy was created in a vacuum,
yeah,
right? Because you're the one that's looking outside. You're the one that's bringing in the outside perspective, the customer perspective, the market perspective, what your competitors are doing, how their products are priced. All of that has to be factored into your company go-to-market strategy. And if you're just handed a strategy, none of that has occurred. So the chances of that, I mean, you might get lucky, maybe it'll work.
yeah, yeah.
Hey, blind squirrel finds a nut every now and then, but
Right.
most likely it's not going to work. And so that's I think one fundamental challenge that a lot of marketing leaders need to face and take head on.
Right.
And you asked about calling the ball. I think there's some art and some science to that. I'll be honest. There's a lot of science, and a lot of the latter part of my career I've spent really studying behavioral science and behavioral economics, and that whole field didn't exist when I started my
Right.
career,
Yeah.
but it has existed for about the last 20 years, and really that like connected so many dots for me because I had always been, as I mentioned earlier, so fascinated with how people make decisions and why people make decisions, and the field of behavioral
Sure.
science. Up until 2007, when Kahneman published Thinking Fast and Slow, that
Yes.
everyone thought like classical economics, which I have an economics degree, classical economics was the rational actor, right? You assumed the rational actor. Well,
Yes. Love that.
reality is we are not rational beings.
No.
We are like thinking, we're feeling and meaning making machines that think occasionally.
Yeah.
And so if so getting back to calling the ball, like you really have to look at the psychology of your target buyer and what is happening in the market, what others are doing, and how are you going to reach them in a way that nobody else is, that makes you stand out. And that's again both a skill and a science, but there is a lot of science to it. And at the end of the day, yes, you have to do experiments, you have to test,
Yeah. Yeah.
but you
Right.
can really shorten that testing cycle to get to success by thinking through the buyer journey, thinking through the psychology of your buyer and how they make decisions and how you're going to use the way the brain actually works to position your products and services.
Yeah. I love that, Rich. I think one of my favorite things is when I have an opportunity to speak with a new CEO about working together. One of my favorite comments, there's a law that I talk about, which is what you think the problem is not. Um, and the goal is to go, let's go find it. Let's figure it out. If we can figure it out, we can fix it. Um, when you're in the room, and I've worked with a lot of, been a founder. I am a founder. I guess I would say that at 72, I founded something. Um, Tried to found retirement, failed. The founders, being a founder of a business is a little egoic, right? Because this was my baby, it was my idea, right? You know, I refer to a book that I study every day, The Science of Getting Rich by Wallace Wattles. It talks about thinking stuff, and so I founded it. This is my baby. I got it going. I'm going, and now I'm going to add some people, and they need to do what I tell them to do, and we're going that way. And you probably have never run into a founder like that.
No, never.
How do
Just
you
met
re-
all of
yeah,
them.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So and I love your comment around the science and art, because behavioral science is across the history of business is a relatively new topic, right? Um, Even though it's 20 some odd years old. So how do you help that founder kind of rejigger rethink kind of where they are from that process, and step back and be willing and open the door to a new thought, to imagination. How do you kind of help that person do that? Because I'd imagine we'll talk about those poor marketers that are stuck out there, right? That have a founder that's stuck in my way or the highway. So what do you do?
Yeah, that is a super common. We were joking about it, but a
Yeah,
super
yeah,
common problem, or just situation, I guess is a better way to put it. Founder starts a company, they have a great idea, they pour their heart and soul into it. Lots of times they take on extreme financial risk for
yeah.
themselves and their families, and it is their baby.
Right.
And the what I often find when I'm talking to a founder or CEO, and they're telling me their organization's kind of hit a growth plateau and they've gotten stuck, what I often find when I get under the covers is the CEO is acting as the head of marketing, the head of sales, the head of finance, the head of HR. They're doing everything, and they're trying to be involved in every little aspect of the business.
Sure.
And basically they have become the bottleneck. And
Yeah.
they need to get out of their own way. Like it's very common for the founder of an organization not to be the one that takes it public, not to be the one that takes it across the finish line, right? And,
Sure.
and there's a reason for that, because there's some people that are really good at founding things, and
Yeah.
there's other people that are really good at growing and managing them. And they're sometimes very, very different personalities. So some of the most successful situations that I see is where you have a visionary founder, but they've got a solid operator behind them. And that operator is really the person who's running like the day-to-day operations within the organization. It's also important for, I talk to, the CEO's job is really just three things. It's vision, people, and money. That's it. And if they're not spending their time on those three
Yeah.
things, they're slowing down their organization, right? They need to spend the time on putting people in place, the right people in the right seats at the right time, right, to allow them not to do all those things anymore,
Yeah.
right? And we were also talking a little bit about alignment and strategy,
Right.
and I think that's another thing that that a lot of organizations discount, right? Good example. If and I'll turn it around and be the sales team's perspective,
Sure.
right? If the marketing department comes to the sales department and says, "Hey, here's our new campaign strategy for next year. This is what we're going to do. We're going to go out there. We're going to do this, 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 and this,"
Right.
and the sales team wasn't involved in creating that strategy, how likely do you think your sales team is going to be to actually embrace it and start to implement it?
Slim to none. Right.
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 It's a not invented here.
Right.
And politically, it gives them the opportunity to point the finger at marketing when things go bad for them. When they're not hitting their numbers, they can say, well, it's marketing's fault. They did this crazy campaign. They didn't ask for our input, et cetera.
Right.
The same is true for like all aspects of an organization's business. You have to involve the people who are going to be implementing it in the creation of it. Because when you do that, now they have ownership. Now
Yeah.
they can't say, "Oh, well, I didn't have any part in that. I don't agree with it." Like, no, because now they're part of it, and they actually take ownership of something that they helped to create. That's the dynamic that you really want to foster in any organization, but in a founder-led company or a mid-market business where you don't have lots and lots of people and you don't have lots and lots of cash to weather a black swan, so to speak.
Right.
You've got to have that kind of alignment because you can't afford anybody to be rowing out of sync.
Yeah. Yeah. I really like that. I'm a, you made me smile there as you were going through that. I'm a man. I call it the rule of threes. If it's more than three things, I can't remember it. So, but I love the vision, people, money, which is the role of the CEO. And I see that, and I'll raise my hand, as previously as a founder, when you're in bootstrap mode, and you're trying to found the company and grow revenue and then add people, there's a natural propensity to want to hang on too long. I'm going to hang on, rather than building a bench that I can have come in and do that. So as you're working with these founders, kind of, and help them understand that. And I love that with your background coming in from branding and marketing and kind of thinking about what go to market really looks like who the hell is actually going to buy this and what do they want? Little questions that we ask. But when you're doing that, how do you help that founder identify what it means from a cultural perspective inside of the body of the business to go slide more? You can't let go of everything. There's some do you've got to still be involved in. How do you help them kind of understand the value to the people in the organization if they're focusing just on those three things? What does it mean to the company?
Yeah, and again, part of I think the dynamic that we've been talking about, where the founder comes up with a great product or service idea, they bring it to life, it's their baby. One of the things I often find when I'm talking to an organization that again has kind of hit a growth plateau or they're having difficulty growing, is that
Great point.
the founder is still spending all of their time on product or on service because that's what they know. That's what they love. They built it because they think it's got a massive market and everybody's going to want to buy it. And they don't spend time on distribution and go to market. They don't put the same amount of energy or resources into that. And what I usually say is it's got to be close to 50-50. If you're not spending 50% of your time on distribution and go to market as a CEO and putting the people, money, vision in place for those things, you are not going to succeed, because you might have an amazing product, but nobody knows about it. Nobody knows how to buy it. You haven't differentiated it in the marketplace. You haven't carved out a niche for it in the marketplace, because you've been spending all your time on developing the product and not enough time on developing distribution, which is really what a company is all about, right? Like a product without distribution doesn't go anywhere. Distribution without a product doesn't go anywhere. It's all got to work together.
Yeah. My simple analogy as you're talking about that is I've been a musician my whole life. And if you're just sitting in the studio, in that rehearsal studio, playing the same songs over and over and over and over, and nobody ever hears those songs, then you've kind of then fundamentally the songs don't exist. They're cool, but nobody's ever going to hear that song. So as you're kind of doing that, let's flip it a little bit, because I think there's a thing that happens at the founder's layer, right? And in particular, I love the conversation around vision, and I'd love your concept, your idea around, this is a 50-50 split. You've got to do that because we're human behaviorally. Talk about science, right? We're going to want to go do what we love. It is not fun to go do what we don't love, right? To eat the frog. I don't want to go eat the frog. There's that layer then below the founder, right? So there's multiple layers, right? So you have an operator, right, inside of the organization that's hopefully bolted to the founder's right shoulder. And then there's a layer below that. And that's the execution layer, where now, depending upon the side of the company, it could be a VP, a director, or whatever blah, blah, blah title they have. Below that is that another layer where it's the forklift guy. He's going to I'm moving pallets, right? And I know that guy at the top has vision, strategy, stuff in his head, but I've got to move pallets. How do you, when you're working with the founder, help them understand that thinking, that approach flows? And you leaned in a little bit this in the beginning of the conversation. Flows down through the entire organization. It is about them, but it's not just about them.
Yeah, well, I'm a little biased in that I think marketing is kind of everybody's job. Even the forklift operator.
Yeah.
Or a critical marketing role that many companies don't think about is their receptionist, person sitting at the front desk.
Yeah.
I mean, those, everyone in the organization has a role to play in its success.
Yeah.
And I think the best run organizations, the most effective founders that I've seen, they're able to set that vision and inspire the team around them, but also filter it down through, the organization, through their direct reports and their direct reports,
Right.
so that they can tell the forklift operator or the receptionist, how is what you're doing connected to our big purpose? Because it's critical to have them feel that connection.
Yeah.
Every time I move a pallet and I do it in less time than I did it yesterday, I'm
Yeah.
making this up, right? I do it a little bit more efficiently than I did yesterday. One, we get the product to the customer faster, it costs us less money, and our revenue increases.
Yeah.
Right? The receptionist, every time someone walks in the door, you smile, you say hello, you take care of what they need, you be proactive. Do you want a bottle of water? Can I get you a cup of coffee? Right? That sets an impression with that person about your whole organization from that one interaction. Right? And that's often the first impression
Right.
that many people get, right? And as you know, first impressions are what matters. so
Yeah.
these roles are all critical, and I think that the best founders find a way to connect the why of their organization to each individual role.
Yeah. I love that, Rich. And I think that's a critical thing, because there's moments and times where, I've crossed the precipice to go talk to a founder, and the founder has literally said, nobody cares like I do, which is
That's their problem, honestly. They're saying it like it's the organization's problem, but it's their problem. If they haven't made other people care like they care,
yeah, then that's their thing. And I love your
yeah.
your idea. One of my favorite things in I'm kind of moving towards. I'll say this on this podcast. I haven't said it ever before, but one of the things I'm contemplating is, we talk about leadership, right, and the tenets of leadership, and you talk about it, and I talk about it. We talk about accountability and communication and transparency and blah blah. All the stuff that goes in. Matter of fact, I just wrote about it. But it really is. It comes down to peopleship, because at the end of the day, I think one of the things that is easy to get lost in the mindset of a leader is the fact that we really all kind of want the same stuff. We want a good life. We want a vacation. We want to take care of our family. We want to pay for colleges. I think you're paying for 2. I've paid for 5. You got more to go. And I think that it's easy to come for that founder or kind of around that layer, the co-conspirator, their COO or whatever they happen to call them, to get hung up in that mode of nobody cares like I care. And then they embody it. They lose track of the fact that we all really just kind of want the same thing at the end of the day. And if we can get there, I think then that stitches a golden thread and kind of hooks us together. I'll get off my thing. One of the things that I would really love to, I kind of want to ask you about is, when you're working with that founder, and I'll go back a little bit to go-to-market strategy. And I think a lot of times we have a preconceived idea around what that go-to-market strategy is, right? Because we're in the jar and I've created it, I'm going that way. How do you help guide the thinking around change?
Yeah.
Big question.
That is a big question. Because people, like human beings, we're very much creatures of habit, and we don't like change. But one of the realities of life is that everything is constantly changing.
Yeah.
There's nothing static, right? When it's either growing or dying, it's increasing or decreasing. That's just the way that the universe works. Change is just a part of it.
Yeah.
I've been involved in some what you might call crisis situations in organizations. I was the chief marketing officer of AIG Bank during the financial crisis in 2008. So
Wow.
I was like right at the epicenter of the whole thing, right?
Wow.
And I think what you learn in a situation like that is that, yeah, the status quo is not going to cut it. We got to change rapidly,
Yeah.
and we have to figure out how we bring along everybody in the organization with that change in order to be successful, because you never fail your way out of a bad situation. And you have to figure out, like, okay, how do we get small wins? How do we put small wins on the board, right? Hit some singles, hit some doubles. Like, you hit 4 singles in a row, you got to run, right?
Sure.
So um, that's like, I think that's critical. And also, going back to what we were talking about before, connecting people to the why, right? What is the big vision or mission? What's the big problem that our organization is trying to solve? Why does that matter, right? And here's, like if we need to pivot, as long as you can't change your why every month or year or quarter, or right?
No.
Like, yeah, you can evolve it over time, and that's fine.
Sure.
But you got to have a real solid reason for being, and then you work to connect everyone in the organization with that reason for being. And if you do that well, then they're going to naturally be more comfortable with change, because they'll understand, say, like, hey, this is what we need to do. What we're doing now is not getting us there, so we need to go in a different direction and do something else.
Right.
Our reason for being hasn't changed, but how we're going to get there might change.
Yeah. I love that. As you were talking about that, just a flash thought that I've never asked. I want to ask you about, just see what you think. So I think, as CMO inside of the body of the organization, so you learn how to speak with the CEO, which means you become intimate with the CEO. You know how you get to know who they are, what motivates them, what inspires them, what's intrinsic, extrinsic, kind of how they work. Um, how do you get comfortable with and I think, as the chief marketing officer, to shift your role into that also of a consigliere, not to make it a mafia, but also that confidant, right? Who has the ear of the CEO, who can confidently say, I think maybe we need to think about this idea, or here's how you may communicate it through the body of the organization. Because I've been inside of companies where, when the CEO came on and talked about strategy and vision and all the stuff that we were going to do, it didn't smell authentic.
Yeah, that was where I was going to go first with the answer to the question. Oftentimes it doesn't come across as authentic, and I've been in organizations where that's happened, where a new strategy or direction was kind of created by the CEO or small group of people,
Yeah.
without the involvement of others within the organization, and that's ripe for that situation that you're talking about right now,
Yeah.
where it just comes across as inauthentic. The people in the company look at it and say, oh, well, this is just the strategy du jour, right? We've done this. We've seen this movie 3-4 times before, and doesn't matter. We're just going to go back and continue to do what we do every day and collect our paychecks.
Yeah.
And 3 months from now, there'll be a new strategy coming down, right? And it's because that they haven't involved people within the organizations. There's no ownership deeper within the company into that strategy. And it can't help but be inauthentic, because it hasn't gathered enough information about the realities of the company and the realities of your situation,
Right.
To be authentic, right? Authenticity comes from being consistent with your purpose, right? The purpose or mission of the organization. If you stay consistent with that purpose, everything that you do will come across as authentic. If you don't, you got a problem. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. And authenticity has an aroma.
And we all know it. I mean, like,
We do.
Yeah, it goes back to, behavioral economics and behavioral science, right? We all know it. Like, we all feel it. There's a real connection between your gut and your brain.
Yeah.
Uh, and like we can interpret things at a subconscious level that our conscious minds just never really register. And
Right.
that's one of those things. Like, you just know it when you see it. Okay, that's authentic or it's not, and you can feel it. And
Right.
I don't know how else to
I think
describe it, but
we'll have to come back. You will have to come back and do an episode 2 at some point in time. Just talk about the triunal brain and how all that stuff, how that really works. That would,
yeah, that would be great. I could talk about that for hours.
we
So
could. Yeah, I was going to say we could do a lot of stand up just on talking about what the
yeah, I
hell.
have my little brain model. It's not it's on the shelf back here. It's not in the
Oh,
camera
dude.
right now, but I have a little model of the human brain that I pull out every now and then.
Yeah, yeah. Gotta go. Let me tell you what's going on. So I promised you that we would get to a point in the podcast where that's enough. We're kind of we're kind of approaching that point. But I want to a couple things I want to do. First thing is I've enjoyed this conversation. This has been a really valuable conversation to leaders. So I want to just put that thought out there. I want to talk a little bit about the kind of clients that you work with and the kind of clients you don't work with. We're talking about this before we hit go, right? We're not for everybody, and not everybody's for us. So let's explore that just a little bit, and then we'll talk a little bit about kind of next steps.
Great. Yeah. So we really like to work with companies that recognize that there is a gap between what they're currently doing in the marketplace and where they want to be. And they recognize that they need to put systems in place to create predictable growth. The size of the organization doesn't matter that much. The industry doesn't matter that much. You asked about companies I don't want to work with. I don't want to work with the ones that think they have it all figured out.
Yeah.
I want to work with the ones that are humble enough to know they don't have it all figured out, and they recognize that their go-to-market strategy needs a boost, and they recognize that they need to create predictable growth. Particularly we're talking about founder-led companies,
right?
Typically privately held. And again, doesn't matter the size, but if almost all of the founders that I talk to have this dream of a big outcome sometime in the future. Either they're going to take their company public, they're going to sell it to a strategic investor, and they're going to have this big outcome. And so they have this dream about the big outcome, but what they haven't done is haven't worked backwards from the end of the movie to where they are today and figured out, okay, what are the steps? And you can do a lot to engineer your outcome if you're intentional about it each step along the way.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. That's a missing gap, I think, a lot of times in the mind of founders, because when they know where they're going, but they haven't thought about how do I come back to where I'm at? What really are the steps to cross that cross that chasm, to quote a book, right? Anyway, so I appreciate that. So just without we can give URLs. Most people are going to be driving or in a place where they're not going to write stuff down. Listeners, all of the links to talk to Rich are going to be in the podcast show notes. They're everywhere on all of the platforms that you go to listen to the podcast. I'm not going to tell you where to go to listen. Where do you prefer people come find you? Do you prefer they go to your website, they drop an email, go to your LinkedIn? What's your personal preference for how people find you?
Yeah, the easiest place and probably the easiest one to remember is my website, and it's just richmsmith.com.
Perfect.
And there's a lot of information about what I do and how we help organizations and some of the success stories and my blog, podcast, all the other stuff out there. If you find that kind of marketing, behavioral science stuff interesting, there's a lot of content there for that.
Yeah, go check it out. So listeners, that's only 10 letters. Rich M. Smith. You can do 10 letters. And do go check out Rich's podcast. as a fellow podcaster, I love the fact, one, that you took on the mission. It is a lot of work, and it can be consuming to go do it all, especially when you're doing it with the right intention. So I will encourage listeners, go listen to Rich's podcast, go check him out, go to his website, go do that. And the reason why I lean in hard on this with you listeners is there's a rule in leadership and a rule in business, which is you can't do it by yourself. There are moments in time where you've got to go get help. You've got to go talk to somebody that knows how to help you accelerate a solution to a problem that you have today, so that you don't put your company into a slow spiral of death because you didn't have the ego to say, I need help. So reach out to Rich, have the conversation. Whether you engage or not is not the consequence. And the fact that you take time to engage in a conversation means everything. That's your point. That's your point of entry to have some discovery there. So I encourage you to go do that, listeners. So I end with gratitude again, dude. And here it slipped into, we got all the way to the end of the podcast almost before I called you dude. And this has been really good. I've really enjoyed this conversation and the opportunity not to use any of the questions I prepared. And just come spend some time with you, and for you helping with my personal mission is to empower 1 million leaders. That's my focus. And you've played a good role in that today. So I want to tell you, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you so much. And I really, really enjoyed the conversation. I love the mission you just said, as we've talked about. That's one that I identify closely with as well. And yeah, it's been great. Hope your listeners get some good stuff out of what we've talked about.
Oh, they will. I'm confident they will. All right, listeners, 2 things at the end of every podcast. You see the same 2 things. Give the podcast a no, like, share, or follow, or comment, or subscribe. It has nothing to do with vanity numbers. It has to do with how the algorithm behind the podcast actually works. It doesn't become visible without those mechanical things going on in all of the algorithms. The reason why that matters is the podcast is intended to help other leaders be better leaders and help them solve challenges and problems that they may be facing today. And without the podcast visible, they can't do that. The second way we do that is share the podcast. Tell somebody about it. Send them a note. Say, hey, you got to listen to this guy, Rich. He was talking about go-to-market strategy and how you get hung up in go-to-market strategy and why that matters and what the hell a CMO really does. So share the podcast. Send it out. I'm grateful for everybody to take the time to listen to the podcast today. I'm Doland White. I'm the host of the Next Interview Show podcast. I'll see you next Tuesday.
Thanks for listening to this week's The Next Interview Show podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast and then take time to turn what you heard here into action.